Hey, Happy Life Potters. It's time for another training video. But what we're going to do is we're going to do a couple of bowls here. And I try to make a couple of bowls like the beginner bowls, about the size, not some big monster bowl. And I put a little bit of wonkiness in it. So maybe I can have a problem or two instead of throwing a perfect bowl that trims perfectly. This would be a little bit more consistent with one of the bowls that you start with, okay? And it's round. If we trimmed it properly, we don't have a whole lot of skirt in the bottom, but the first thing that we want to do is hold the bowl and feel the sides, okay? And we want to feel down and kind of visually look from the top down this way, and we can kind of see where it comes out and goes wide right here. And I probably am not able to capture that in the camera, but I get a visual understanding about how thick the clay is and how much I can trim. And I also feel the bottom, okay? And especially right here in the center, because that's where I opened. And I want to put my hand in the back and see if there's any give or flex there. Because if there's not a lot of clay, and when I tend to throw, it's just a habit, I don't leave a lot on the bottom because I don't like deep feet. But some of you might, and if you've got a lot of clay, like if that was my bottom and it was that thick, which it's not, I got a lot of clay, I'm going to cut some of that out to lighten it up. But in this case, I'm just going to do a representative foot, a very shallow foot, just so I can show you how it's done. And I've got enough clay on the side that I can trim off significantly, so let's get it centered. When we trim, we go directly to the wheel head, okay? We don't put it on a bat. We put it directly in the wheel head, and most of our pieces are going to be small enough to where they're going to fit between the bat pins. And you can see there's concentric circles, so it helps me visually to kind of get it aligned, okay? And I can turn the wheel on slowly and see if it needs to be adjusted. If you've got a little bit of wonkiness in your pot and you can't really tell, you can put your hand on the side and see how it goes away and touches, goes away and touches. And so when it touches, I can scooch it just about half the difference of what it was doing before. And I'm going to check it down here, and down here it's just fine. So the wonkiness is a little bit in the base. And a lot of this is going to come from when you clean your skirt, and sometimes even pulling the wire tool through the bottom will just stretch the clay just enough to make it seem like it's not round, but it will be once we trim it. So I want to grab a piece of clay, and I want to get some clay off the table. I don't want to use recycled clay that's really wet, the dead clay as we call it here in the shop. I want to get clay, but I don't want to just tear some off of a new ball. Usually Nick does an amazing job at keeping some extra pieces of pugged clay there that are just soft enough to where they're not so wet, but they're also going to stick to the bat. And we'll break it into two pieces, and then we'll break those into two more pieces, and just roll between your hands two little caterpillar worms. Okay, so here's two, and then I'm going to do the same for these two. And the goal is to work on opposing sides at the same time. And so I'm going to take my two little caterpillars, and I'm going to go at 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock, and I'm going to press down to stick it to the bat and slightly in. Please do them at the same time so you don't scooch it around. And secondly, I'm really wanting it to go down. I'm not wanting to squeeze my pot in, because sometimes ultimately when you get used to trimming, you're going to be trimming these when they're leather hard, and they're going to be soft, especially if you want to put a handle on a mug. It's going to be flexible a little bit. If you squeeze it in, you're going to bend it if you're lucky. If you're not lucky, you'll just crack it, and that's happened. Okay, so now I'm going to check it, still relatively in the center. So we've got two trimming tools. This one, adequately called the pear trimmer. This is usually the one I like to start with. My other trimmer has a round end and a square end, and we pretty much always use, when we're starting out, this square end. And the size and the shape of it is perfect for measuring and cutting a foot. But we'll get to that in a moment. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this on, turn my wheel on, and I'm going to put my hand on top of the bottom. Okay? And I'm just kind of feeling it. See, some of you are going to have maybe some wonkiness up and down a little bit. This one's not too bad. Okay? If you do have some really severe wonkiness, on the low side, if it's tilted up, you can tilt this up a little bit and scooch a little bit of clay underneath it and press it into the clay and kind of level it off. But this one feels okay. If your clay's really dry, you can take a sponge, or you can actually even dunk it in the water for about 2 seconds and take it out. Let it sit for about a minute, and then it's ready to trim again. If the clay is white around the rim, be very careful, because that's bone dry and that is fragile. If you squeeze or bend it, it'll just snap off in your fingertips. So these are all things that we want to look for before we put a knife to it, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work on the outside edge, okay? And when I felt inside, I know I have a lot of clay here, so I'm going to put my trimming tool on this edge to feel how dry and how wet is the clay. And you can see all this here. I've been trimming some of my stuff. So trimming is a part of pottery. And I'm going to work this top edge, and it feels just about right. It's not too dry. It's nice and wet, and the clay is coming off in ribbons, but it's flying off. It's not sticking to the clay. Sometimes it gets sticky, and that's a little trickier. But hopefully the clay has dried off. So I'm going to work this edge, and I'm going to get it clean. And you can see they're coming off in ribbons. And I'm going to come down to pretty close to where the balls of clay are. And now I'm going to shape it. And see how this is coming off? So all that extra clay, because I'm learning, I can take all that clay off and start trimming this up to be kind of a pretty looking pot. Okay, so once I get this kind of straight, I want to put a foot. Now I could round out the bottom, or I can put a foot. We've talked about this, so I'm going to use this tool. And since my fingers are on the top and it's resting, I'm using my thumb to brace. I have this finger free. This is my brace finger. I can press up and down with it, and I can press left and right. In this case, I'm going to put my finger right on the edge of the pot, and you can see where, hopefully in the camera, you can kind of see where I'm rubbing on there, not pressing too hard, but I'm going to jam this right to here like this, and it's going to control it so I can cut a foot. So here's what it's going to look like. Okay, see how it's cutting that little foot in the bottom? Now, if I just came at it like this thing could go all over the place. The clay could reach a soft spot or a hard spot, and this would skip like a record player bouncing on the floor. But in case the pot moves, my hand is on top to hold it, and my finger's here to brace, just like when we throw, to brace the tool. And once I cut a little foot into it, I'm going to turn my tool sideways, still brace with my forefinger, and press down gently and round that corner out. See how that is? And this is a style preference, okay? If I want to cut a little bit more in, I can cut a little bit more in. So I'll just show you that, and I'm going to put a little angle on it. It's just a style preference. And I'm going to round this over, and I'm going to trim this down just a tad. Here again, my finger bracing. Okay, so I'm going to leave that little tiny ridge on there, because that's going to give me a glaze break. When my glaze comes down, if it comes down and starts to run, it's going to hit that little tiny ridge and slow it down a little bit so it doesn't just run to the bottom. Okay, so now that I have that foot in there, actually I'm going to cut the foot a little deeper so I can show this next part. This is just a little practice bowl. We're going to recycle it when I'm done. Okay, so now I'm going to cut a shallow foot. And there's a number of things I can do. I've talked to some of you about this. I could put a couple little concentric circles in the bottom. Okay, and I could stop there if my bottom was really, really thin. But in this case, I want to demo a shallow foot. So what I'm going to do here, again, my fingers braced, and I'm braced my hands together. My knees and my legs are up against the wheel head, and I'm crouched in pretty tight, so I'm not moving. I'm like a digital machine right here. And I'm going to come down. I'm going to, at the very minimal, the width of this tool, that's the minimal I want for my little foot on the outside edge. So I'm going to come in right here, and I'm just going to press down right between the center of the clock and 3, about like this. Okay, now I'm not going to go real deep in this particular pot because I don't have a lot of clay down there. Some of your pots are going to be really thick, and you can go really deep. Some of your pots are going to be really thin. If you go really deep, you're going to go through the bottom. Everybody does it at least once. At least one time you will destroy a pot when you're trimming. I almost trimmed a big one earlier today that was so big it barely fit inside here, and I almost went through the sides. It was so thin. So it happens. You get excited and it starts getting fun. Okay, after I trim this right here, this is like my safety zone, okay? I'm going to come to the center of the pot, and I can see the middle, but I'm not going to go past center, because if I go past center, it's going to take my tool and turn it under and put a big gouge, maybe even right through the bottom of my pot. So I'm going to come right about here, and what's nice is as I go down, I'm going to go out, but as I go down, see that little center, little chocolate chip there growing? That's kind of a gauge of how deep I am, and I can compare that to this because I have the edge of this that I can look at, okay? And I'm going to get a dry paintbrush. So this is how you check to see if it's dry. Okay. So now I don't know how deep this is, so one of the things you'll learn over time, and it takes practice, is to tap. I know how thick the sides are. You probably can't hear that, but this sounds thin. This sounds like it's getting really thin. The second thing I can do is I can press gently. If it flexes, you're done. That's don't push it. You stop right there. But this one, I can go down a little bit more because I want to show an example. And I'm going to bring over here to my safety zone. I'm going to feather this out. I'm going to take my dry paintbrush and demo that. Okay, and if it's deep enough, one of the things that you're going to notice is when you drag this over your clay, it's groggy. In other words, there's grit inside the clay to give it some strength while you're learning. And that grit doesn't look real pretty. It looks grainy. So I'm going to take this little room key or little card. I'm going to press down on it while the wheel's moving and smooth it out. Make it all nice and pretty. And I'm also going to put my finger on this edge, just like we talked about before, and round that out. And I'm going to smooth it out down here because I don't like the grit. Sometimes it even helps when I'm glazing if I smooth this out, and it makes me feel better because it's pretty. Okay, now this is a personal preference. See that little niblet that's right there? If you want to take it off, don't trim it off, pull it off. And this is kind of fun. You put your tool right on it and just pull it towards you. Boop, there it goes. It's gone, okay? That keeps me from having to go over accidentally. If you want to leave it in there as a design feature, that's your choice, okay? And at this stage, I would probably just sign my name in the bottom. We talked about having an artist signature, but what I'm not going to do is brush that off because that's wet clay, and if I brush it off, I'll fill it back in the holes. I'll put my little HLP for Happy Life Pottery. I'm not going to brush it also. Okay, I'm going to let that dry very carefully. And that's how we trim a pot. Now, I want to show you a couple other things. This point forward is a little optional, but there are a couple tricks I want to show you. One is, what if I take this off and I need to put it back down? I've went through the time to center it, and I have cut this ring and this ring to this center. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my wooden stick and I'm going to put a little mark in the clay and a little tiny smudge on the clay body. And it may not show on the camera, but there's a little smudge there. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. Okay, a little tiny smudge. And this little smudge on here, I can rub it off later and it'll make it go away. Then I'm going to remove the clay from these two little caterpillar worms there. And I'm going to scooch this way and gently lift it up and feel, how's this feel? Do I have a lot of clay down there? Did I trim enough? Is this too thin? If it's too thin, I can't do much about it. But what if I want to take off a little bit more? What if I decide, you know what? This is really nice, but I got a little extra clay here for a cat bowl. This is kind of heavy. Okay, where are my little marks? I've got a little mark there and a little mark there. Check this out. This is a great trick. These stay down. I line up that little mark. I line up this little mark. Okay, and I put my little worms back on there on the other side. Carefully here. And one right here. And I am trimmed in the same spot as I was before. Look at that, it's not moving any, okay? Some of your pots are kind of wonky, and when you center it, you're kind of centering and then you're trimming to that center and you create a new center, and it's really hard to get it back there again and not make it look like there's a problem. But now I've got this one centered and I'm able to trim this. So I'm going to come right back and take off some extra clay. Check this out. A lot of clay. Okay. Now, do you notice it started to wobble a little bit? I'm glad that happened. My hand is right here, but that extra clay I just put down, it started to spin. So guess what? I've got my little marks. I can reline up my clay because it's spun, it's slipped. The new pieces that I laid down moved. These are solid, but these are getting kind of dry, which brings me to another tip. If you trim a piece and you take it off and put it down, or you trim 2 or 3 pieces while you're sitting here, these start getting dry and the dry clay falls on them. If they're too dry, they won't stick down to the metal wheel head. Take them, put them in the recycle bin, or with the dead clay, get another piece of clay, twist it off, make new ones, okay? But remember, if you're doing this, in this case, I'd put 2 new here and then peel these off and put 2 new there if they were getting too dry. So now I'm back to my turning, and we're moving some more clay. And I'm going to put some little lines in there. And looky there. Great, now I've got a lighter pot, I'm done. I'm going to take them all off so I can flip this over. Oh, that feels much better, much, much lighter. And then I'm going to stick my fingers in a little bit of water here. And I'm just going to rub that through with my thumb, and it's gone. And here's the second one. Just a little bit of smudge, and there it goes. So I put those little design lines in there. Now I can get this brushed off. There we go.